Good evening and welcome to The Right Side, where we talk about today's issues, news, and trends from an admittedly conservative perspective. My name's Chris Pareja. I'm your host this evening, and I'm joined by Dr. David Bobb from Hillsdale College. This evening we're going to be talking about the value of a civic education. And so, David, thanks for joining us.
Great to be with you, Chris.
So, we've had a little bit of time to kind of spend together, but tell us a little bit about what a civic education means to you and why it's important.
A civic education means very simply an education in citizenship. We're not born knowing what we need to in order to be great Americans. No person is in any country, but particularly when you're in a democratic form, or maybe more to the point, a Republican form, both small d and small r. When the people rule, it's incumbent upon them to know about their principles, the precepts, the way in which they want to live. And so I think that civic education, which has fallen on very hard times, you ask most kids today, what is civics? And they give you a blank stare. They have no idea. They might have a course in something called social studies, but even that isn't taught as much as civics once was. It used to be a really vital part of sustaining American liberty, and it no longer is.
Well, what's interesting is having been out and talking to people from a candidate perspective, going out and getting a feel for what people know about the way that government works at all. Most of them were at a complete loss. What was interesting is you used the word citizen. And that has all sorts of connotations in today's discussions. But the people who knew the most about how our government worked, about the form of government, and their responsibility for being knowledgeable as a voter were the newly minted citizens. People from other countries who they weren't born here.
Yes.
They didn't grow up here. They'd been exposed to other political processes and the corruption and the cronyism that happened there. They were looking for a new life. And they took it seriously when they were studying to become citizens, and they would usually run circles around the majority of the population we would engage with on street corners.
There's nothing more exciting than to see that kind of enthusiasm and knowledge. You know, the citizenship exam, the naturalization exam, is not a piece of cake.
No.
It has even gotten better in the last decade, but the questions that are asked are questions that a lot of Americans would be stumped on. I did an experiment a few years ago in an undergraduate course at Hillsdale College. We teach a course on the Constitution, and all of our students have to take that course. And I began one of the sessions early in the semester by giving them a representative sample of the naturalization exam questions. I didn't reveal to them what those questions were taken from. And then at the end, we talked about the fact, after we graded the papers in class, and some of the kids were ashamed at some of the easy ones that they missed, about what significance there was in a knowledge base in a citizenry. You know, America, it's often said, is an idea, and I think there's some real truth to that.
Sure.
But it is based upon a certain set of ideas that came together in our founding. Mm-hmm. We have a birthday as a nation. Not many countries do. And knowing what makes us a people, what unites us, is something that's so vital. And yet so many of our schools miss out on this opportunity.
Yes.
To bring together. We're such a polyglot people. We speak so many different languages. We represent so many different cultures. And I think it's more and more vital that we have a sense of what the common good is.
Mm-hmm. And part of that entails understanding our history, understanding our past, where we came from, good points and the ugly spots. We've had ugly spots as a country. But if we don't know about them and we don't discuss them and why they occurred and how we overcame them, then the story goes that we're likely to repeat a lot of those ugly spots as well.
I think that's really true. One of the things that is assumed today in classrooms, but it actually is a kind of tough question when you think about it for a moment, is so I'll do an experiment with students early on when we're talking about the American founding and our original sin in this country, as it's been called, of slavery. Mm-hmm. I'll ask people, how many of you think slavery is wrong? And of course, every hand goes up. Why? we'll spend the better part of an hour on that question.
What's the most common response? Why is it wrong from their perspective?
Well, first off, they'll say because our laws say it so. Well, then the question, of course, is, well, why do they say it is so justly? Because just because a law says something doesn't necessarily make it so.
Right.
We have to look then to the source of our laws. What gives the Constitution force? What gave that 13th Amendment power when it banned the institution of slavery? And then the 14th and 15th in fulfillment of that idea of equality to all Americans.
Right.
That's a story that takes a lot longer to tell. And you know, somebody like Howard Zinn, who's very popular in classrooms these days, even several years after his death, his best-selling book, A People's History of the United States, characterizes the American founding with two words: guns and greed. And he suggests, very cynically, I think, that the men who composed the Declaration of Independence and established that great idea of equality for all betrayed it in the Constitution. That was, in fact, a document full of compromise, and it compromised away the principles of the American Revolution. I don't see our history as that. But what Zinn does, as he continues his narrative, is just emphasizing all of the bad spots in American history. And it's a relentlessly negative portrayal. And in fact, I think there's a lot of heroism. There's a lot of great stories. And what's sad now is that too many young people don't even get a chance to study those things.
And part of it people might consider revisionist, or just erasing anything that's more than 100 years old, because it doesn't necessarily fit a narrative for an agenda that they may have that they're trying to encourage people to pursue.
I think there's some of that at work. One of the problems is that on a very practical level now, we spend a lot of time in our classrooms with a lot of non-essential things. And we also have a lot of, at the local level, K through 12 schools are laboring under many, many mandates from Washington, D.C. There's only so much time in a school day. And I'd argue that carving out time so that you're doing the reading, mathematics, and also civics are the really vital things that people ought not to neglect.
Right. But so what's the solution? How do you bring it back? I mean, one of the things that I think is missing is critical thought. People are much more used to having information handed to them and absorbing it versus debating it, or versus driving a deeper understanding. What's the solution?
I think that that kind of real critical thinking, not just paying lip service to it, is really essential. Understanding that there is a complexity to many of the issues is important, but getting students to be able to articulate different sides and understand that it's not just the easy answer. How do you do that? Well, at Hillsdale College, we're a liberal arts school, have been since our founding in 1844. Now
define what liberal arts means, because the definition has morphed.
It really has. Education in the liberal arts is an education in liberty. It introduces you to the great ideas, particularly of Western civilization, but also the great debate that has been carried on over the last many centuries and indeed millennia. So you're going back, and it's not just as it's been kind of maligned as, you know, studying old dead white men. Rather, it's understanding that if we're to be united as a people, there's certain things that can unite us in a lingua franca, you know, giving us a common language, and pointing your studies to a kind of understanding of liberty. James Madison said that learning and liberty have a kind of mutual support. So you have to subject things to really rigorous scrutiny. And there's nothing more enjoyable than doing that with a group of students that are really eager to do it. A lot of our education now, as opposed to the liberal arts education, which is broad and deep, is very technical. You know, you think about what could an 18-year-old know about, say, environmental law, if they don't know what law is? And the great tradition and debate over what a law and the law ought to be.
Well, and to your previous point, many of them decide that good or evil is based on whether a law is in favor or against it. And so if they don't understand law and they're using law as a thermometer for morality, this opens up a whole nother set of issues for a society.
It really does. And I think that's why a civic education within that kind of tradition of the liberal arts is so vital. What it asks students to reflect on are those questions that Socrates spent his days reflecting on. What is justice? What is friendship? What is love? What are those things that animate us most? Hillsdale College is located in Michigan, a state that outside of the city of Detroit has the largest concentration of Arab Americans in the United States. Right after 9/11, the Dearborn Public Schools, according to a friend of mine who taught there, said that we probably should not at this time discuss this thing in our classrooms. Why? Well, because it was so controversial. But I think what we ought to do is, in fact, go to the things that are most controversial.
Yes.
Because if we cannot equip our students to understand and grapple with these things as young people, they're not going to want to do it when they become older and are actually in positions of responsibility.
Well, some might argue that that's by design, that we avoid the controversial things, and people should just comply, not ask questions, and move along peacefully
well,
and non-confrontational.
There's a strange mentality that exists, where now you see so many people looking to Washington for all of the solutions. We see it often in ways that are both humorous and serious. A colleague of mine who teaches history at Hillsdale came to Washington shortly after the economic collapse of 2008. His taxi cab driver asked him, knowing that he had flown in from Detroit, "Are you here for the money?" We think of Washington as providing us now not only money, but rights and an answer to all the hard questions.
Right.
And so we'll just kick it over to the politicians and they'll figure it out. And I think that the American people still resent that kind of mentality, but it's an easy one to get entrapped by.
Well, it's interesting because since we've lost our understanding of civics as a society, and many have lost the desire to be involved because they think that their voice doesn't matter, or that Washington will just hand down the verdict on what is moral, what is immoral, and take care of it all for us, along with a check to go with it. People haven't, in many cases, met their elected officials that are in Washington or in the state capitals. And I think if they did that, they would be very concerned about handing those things over to them to make decisions about, because in many cases, we are being ruled by our inferiors. And just because someone can get in an airplane and fly to Washington, D.C. makes them no smarter by the time they get there than they were when they left.
Yes, I think there is you mentioned that idea that people feel kind of cowed or not up to the task, and I think that's a real problem today. Citizens should feel empowered by their elected officials, and that sense of accountability that we have had at certain moments in our history has been lost to a certain degree. And I think that you're right that some of our elected officials, too many of them, operate without that sense of accountability.
Well, I mean, and our definitions, because we haven't studied what civics mean, have changed. So in the past, you would think maybe a congressional or senatorial leader was there to protect your rights and to protect the best interests of your community. And it's kind of morphed to what you said. Are you here for the money? And their card, their performance report card, at least here in California, I don't know if it's different in Michigan and Washington, D.C., I have an idea. But they score how well the politician is doing by how much money they bring home. Right. Not thinking about the long-term ramifications of spending that money in excess of what actually exists.
Yes, and that is something that, until we recover that idea of the common good, and that there does exist a thing that is beyond self-interest. The founding fathers never thought that they were going to get self-interest out of politics. The idea is how you can align self-interest with doing the right thing. And that's what we have to become better today, I think, at doing and talking with our young people and getting them involved. One of the things I think that really opens their eyes is if they attend something even as relatively, well, people don't exactly think of city council meetings as inspired gatherings.
Right.
But what scales can fall from students' eyes is just how complex these questions are, how interesting they are, and what actually gets people involved. You know, Tocqueville, writing in the 1830s, said that if you really want to get an American exercised, that is involved in the political process, you will propose building a road through his property.
Yes.
And there's nothing wrong with that. And what's exciting about our country still is that there are some 500,000 elected offices. And that if you want to get involved in politics, if you want to go to Washington and even meet your member of Congress, you can do it.
Right.
We have members of Congress over to Hillsdale's Kirby Center in Washington, D.C., located on Capitol Hill, all the time. And our purpose with them is not to lobby for anything except to be left alone. Hillsdale College does not accept a dime from the federal government nor any state government.
Which makes you unique.
It is a unique thing, and it also shifts the conversation because now politicians in Washington, and I think probably in Sacramento, are so trained, habituated to think when they're meeting with somebody, what are you going to ask from me? Mm-hmm. What do you want? And what kind of transaction are we going to have to do? And if we can begin to shift that conversation a little bit more towards what's going to be the right thing for the long-term health of our republic, we're going to be much better off.
And so one of the things that's very interesting is we talk about education, we talk about the types of programs, we talk about the fact that civics is missing, that you actually have a mandated course in the Constitution. And all of that, you still end up being able to stay in business with no federal dollars. How does that happen?
Well, there's a lot of students that are clamoring to get in, despite the fact that with that course in the Constitution, we plop on each of their desks an 800-page reader, but it's full of primary source documents. And there's an exciting debate when you actually are reading the words of not only those who are in favor of the Constitution, but those who are against it.
Yes.
Of those who, during the Civil War debates about the Constitution, were at it day in and day out, week in and week out, over the course of 4 years trying to figure out, were the actions of Abraham Lincoln constitutional? Was he a dictator? We read those debates, and then we look also at the progressive critics of the Constitution. So what we find is that there's a lot of citizens, too, that are interested in that same thing, and they flock to courses online. They come to various programs that Hillsdale has in Michigan and Washington and around the rest of the country. And there's a lot of people who make this education possible because of all that money we leave on the table with the federal government. We're grateful to the donors who make the scholarships available to the students. But the good news out there is that despite this lack of civic education, there's a whole lot of Americans that still care very much about acquiring this kind of education for themselves and for their children.
And so what cues could other institutions of higher learning take from that experience, and how do we get civics back into the forefront and helping people understand how the country runs?
Well, I think one of the things that we see, there was a good study done by a group called the Intercollegiate Studies Institute that looked at what do students across the country at colleges and universities know coming in about civics and also economics, and what do they know going out? What they showed is that there was actually a kind of reverse learning. that they almost got worse off because it was anything that they might have picked up in high school receded from memory over the course of their 4 years. So one very simple thing is teach courses on things that aren't just the pet projects of professors. Ask the big questions. Ask students to engage and get them thinking such that they then might become more active in doing. I think a lot of the current generation sees voluntarism as a very important thing, and that is to be commended. But they see voluntarism as a kind of substitute for involvement in politics because they see politics as such dirty business. You can actually make a mark, they believe, by volunteering in your community or for larger causes even than your immediate community.
And so talk about an example of how that is and why they figure that's a surrogate activity of some sort.
Well, in some ways, they've been conditioned to that. In a lot of our states now, in order to graduate from high school, you have to do a service learning project. So there's a kind of mandatory voluntarism that's out there, a sort of oxymoron if there ever was one.
Sure.
But you know, I can see the good intention behind that. The problem is that, as one of the leading lights of the American founding said, in order to love liberty, you must first know it. You must first have a sense of what its object is, right? And what you have to understand something about the way our government works before you're going to really be able to be an effective, well, certainly elected official, but also just a citizen. So I think what we need to do is start earlier. There are many charter schools out there that are doing a good job. There are many traditional public schools. Hillsdale has some 3,000 teachers that have gone through our programs geared to middle and high school teachers in civic education. So we have some resources that are available for teachers and work with many institutions across the country. We're in fact in the process now of helping citizen groups across the country start charter schools. California has a thriving, you might say, field of charter schools. And not every charter school is doing a great job.
Right.
Many of them should have their charters pulled and cease to operate. But those that are, they have waiting lists that run a mile long.
Yeah, for sure. But if California's legislature has anything to do with it, don't worry, the charter schools will go away altogether and it'll be a non-problem. But so tell us a little bit about if somebody wants more information about the resources that Hillsdale has available, or if there's a teacher who wants to participate in the classes, where do they find out more information?
The best place to go is online. You can visit hillsdale.edu. There you can find information about the Kirby Center in Washington, D.C., also the program for high school teachers, the charter school program, and if you're interested in considering Hillsdale as an undergraduate or graduate student, you can also find the information on that site.
And can they find referral cards to send their member of Congress over to your address at that location as well?
In fact, you can. And we'd love to hear from people, and we contact members at the behest of citizens all the time.
Perfect. I think you'll be getting some calls from around the Bay Area. And so if you hold on for just a moment, David, we need to take a quick break for a word from our underwriter, the Conservative Forum.
Say, well, I say I'm a constitutional law attorney. And they say, oh, really? What kind of constitutional law attorney? I say, well, I'm the true kind. The kind that believe that the Constitution is what the Constitution says and what it was intended to say. Anything beyond that is tyranny and should not be allowed.
So it's come to this, my friends. You ready for the second American Revolution against a ruling class that simply lectures but does not listen or defend the American people? It is government versus the people. Am I right? Yes. Look at the Electoral College example, right? A leftist popular challenge to states' rights. You think the founders weren't brilliant people? Did they not know what they were doing by carefully calibrating to get the small states and the big states to come together? Why does Wyoming get 2 senators in California? Actually, I'd rather have Wyoming's 2 senators.
And welcome back to The Right Side. That was a word from our underwriter, the Conservative Forum. In addition to underwriting our show, what they're best known for is their speaker series. And we were graciously accompanied this evening by Dr. David Bobb from Hillsdale in preparation for his speech coming up later this evening. So he'll be there tonight. In May, Bill Whittle of Afterburner and PJTV fame will be our guest. In June, Ying Ma, author of Chinese Girl in the Ghetto, July 9th. Debbie Bacigalupi, a recent local congressional candidate. And in August, on the 6th, Steve Forbes and Elizabeth Ames are going to be speaking. They're the co-authors of Freedom Manifesto, and yes, it is that Steve Forbes. But you can find out more at theconservativeforum.com if you'd like to join us in person at the forum. We meet at the IFES Hall, Portuguese Hall, at 432 Stearland Road in Mountain View, the first Tuesday of each month, except for in July, which is the second Tuesday, and the program starts around 7. As David articulated, we definitely are lacking civic education in today's educational arena, and we need to bring it back. We need to, as a population, as a society, understand how government works and understand the role of government, understand how to affect change within those circles, and that our voices still do matter if we use them correctly. And the only way we can survive as a country is to be educated about how these things work. So I encourage you to please do your part as a citizen to educate yourself, to know how the system works, and to, most importantly, vote. We thank you for joining us this evening. Again, I've been your host, Chris Pareja. This has been The Right Side, and we'll look forward to seeing you in person or on the show sometime soon. Have a great evening.